Stops here, but we go back with G. Knight talking about the overall situation.
We're working very hard right now to get back into business as normal. The Coin Laundry, of course, they have a problem because they can't use the water, so it's not known when they will be able to get going. Hardee's, we talked to them, and they hopefully will get going Tuesday, as well as the Love and Oven. Of course, a lot depends on when they get some more water. And one of the most unbelievable businesses, Bob's Supermarket, they have been working feverishly, and the last word from them is that they have high hopes of being open this afternoon. Godfrey Sunoco, they had some 3 to 4 feet of water. They are open now, and it's very unusual to look down there because there is a van truck plus some 8 or 10 cars that were in the lot next to the Sunoco station that some 3 days ago were covered almost to the tops with water. They are still there, and from here you cannot tell that there was any water around them. And of course, lots of activity at the filtration plant. They are working feverishly over there right now, doing their best to get the water restored to the Farmville area residents. They hope now, the early part of the week, that they can be pumping and getting the water back to the residents of Farmville. In summing up, one has to wonder what the owners of these businesses are thinking about now. This area has seen a lot of development during the past years, and I wonder how this will affect future progress along Route 460 and 15 in West Farmville. This flooding has never occurred like this before, and I know everyone is hoping and praying it never happens again. We take you next to...
These are live recordings conducted by staff at WFLO Radio covering the Great Flood of 1972 that hit Farmville in the spring from Hurricane Agnes. These recordings are courtesy of WFLO Radio in Farmville. This is Bob Hurt being interviewed by John Wilson.
None of these people have been asked. They just pitched in and started working on their own. And lots of phone calls that come in offered free service for us, and we really appreciate it for it.
Bob, when did you first realize that the supermarket was in trouble?
Well, I said shortly after supper time, about 6 o'clock the other night, we realized it was coming up in the ditches across the road, and when I went to supper, it was about 6 inches below the road, and when I came back, it was just about on the apron of the hard surface. And I'd say about 30 minutes later, it just looked like it just rose up all at once and came across, and I stayed here till 10 o'clock, and the police department warned us to get out of the building. And then my son and another employee stayed with Mr. Speeds, and they went around.
Now the tape abruptly stopped.
Back to our studios.
And we end now with Bob Woodburn.
Hurricane Agnes has dealt her blows on the area, the worst in Farmville's history. And the irony of it all is that the worst struck on Wednesday, June 21st, the first day of summer. This has been a WFLO special report. The Flood. This is Bob Woodburn, WFLO News.
Out to us, too. Henry Fulcher's come on by from his point where he was broadcasting from a few moments ago. Henry, if we were standing here the other night, we'd be about waist deep in water here at the end of the bridge. Water went over top of the bridge, and Jack Osborne tells me that the crest was roughly 4 feet higher than the Great Flood of 1940. And there's a yellow mark here on the end of that bridge. It went over top of that and actually touched the lower railing at the end of the bridge. Of course, the center of the bridge is a little bit higher than it is here at the end, but Mr. Osborne and I stood there and looked at it with field glasses, and we could see that the water was lapping at that upper rail, the lower rail rather, at the end of the bridge at its highest point. Henry Fulcher has talked quite a bit with the folks at Craddock Terry. Henry, what have you learned about the outlook for their future operation?
Well, John, I don't think they're going to be back in business in the immediate future. I don't think it'll be this coming week. They're working right now, as a matter of fact, and they have been more or less working around the clock since the night of the flood. And the flood, you know, filled up the entire lower level of the Craddock Terry Company. It went into the second floor by about 6 inches. And they have more or less completed the cleanup operation on the second floor. And yesterday and today have been working on the lower floor. at Craddock Cherry, and I don't think they're able to pinpoint any loss. I know it was great, but they're still working, and hopefully they're going to be back in business, say, within about a week or so.
Henry, thanks a lot. Before these other two gentlemen leave, I'd like to ask them if they have any final thoughts or final statements. You know, Robert Wilford mentioned just now, this is the way people have reacted in assisting here certainly is a tribute to our community. You expressed yourself about that the other night. I imagine you feel even more so about it now, don't you?
I certainly do, because there hadn't been any looting or anything, people taking advantage of the situation. But we certainly should thank these fire companies who've come in here and helped wash these buildings out. Prospect Fire Department came down, washed my warehouse out, and we really appreciate that, and I know the people all over town do.
Phil Gay contacted quite a number of firemen in nearby towns, and they responded immediately, and they've been hauling water in, doing a great job. Robert, thanks ever so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you, John.
Thank you again, Wilford.
John, I do want to add to Robert's comment on the fire companies. Cambridge helped us out tremendously in washing down our merchandise with water being so short. And I do want to compliment WFLO for doing such a fantastic job on coverage and keeping us posted and keeping us in touch with how everything was happening. We were so busy that with our own miseries that we couldn't realize how much misery everybody else had without WFLO. And I certainly appreciate the job you and Henry and everybody connected with the station did for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilford. Appreciate that very much. Now, as we said, this is where it all started, right here at the Appomattox River. This is where it all began, as the waters of the Appomattox started rising late in the day on Wednesday, June 21st, following heavy day-long rain, which added up to 7.5 inches in a little more than 24 hours. Groce's Branch in Farmville, which runs south to north through town, paralleling South Street, had run over its banks during the day. By nightfall, the Appomattox was again backing up Groce's Branch, swelling it to record levels. By 10 o'clock, the water was 3 feet deep on the other side of the bridge here between Burkett Oil Company and Craddock Cherry, and still rising. As we said, Taylor Manufacturing Company had moved much of their stock, except for the lumber yard. W.A. Price Company had been evacuating then. The Appomattox still continued to rise, and by morning it covered the approaches to the Cumberland Bridge to the north of where we're standing right now, backing up eventually just about to the gasoline pumps of the Estes Texaco station, and, as we said, reaching the lower rail here at the end of the bridge, and into the second floor at Craddock Cherry, inundating many other buildings around here, too. There were cattle lost on the river road. There are other losses that we still don't know about, and the story probably will continue for some time. There's no way, really, that we can tell it all today, even in a much longer time than we've taken on this program, and we've taken longer than we intended. There are really stories on top of stories. WFLO personnel were cut off from the station for a time during the flood, all but yours truly, who drafted his wife into the organization temporarily, and we kept things going till others could arrive. The feeling here, I guess, to all of us who've been involved is that it all still seems somehow unreal, but it really did happen. We've tried to tell you as much as we could, but admittedly these have still been only the highlights. We, in fact, we'd be glad to hear your comment on our coverage. For one reason, there's somewhere in Washington an agency known as the Federal Communications Commission, which has the authority to renew broadcast licenses, and they do so of deserving stations. We hope we deserve to have ours renewed. This has been a special report on the worst flood in Farmville in modern times, perhaps the worst in the town's history, the June flood of 1972, and as we said, this is where it all began, right here on the banks of the Appomattox River. This is John Wilson at the Appomattox River Bridge, the Cumberland Bridge, Route 45, North Main, however you choose to describe it now. Speaking for our entire staff, Al Smith, Henry Fulcher, Gene Ike, Larry LeSueur, special reporter Bob Woodman, and all the others who have assisted us with this, thanking you for listening and returning you now back to our studios.
And we end now with Bob.